Hi, guys. Just going to warn everyone right now. I do have a new puppy.
Yeah.
Yes, it's very exciting, but he's a puppy and the husband is stuck at work as expected. So if I have to shut the video off or take a minute, you'll know why. I'll be right back if that happens.
Oh, good. Can you guys hear me? We were having some audio. You can.
Yes.
Beautiful.
Yep.
Thank
I
you.
can hear you.
Great.
Right.
Out in here.
Just waiting for Marty. Nate had a conflict, so he will not be joining us, I don't believe.
If I may, did the council receive the addendum that Kristen punched out yesterday?
Nope.
No. Okay. It's a two minor. Let's see.
You want me
And
to
Nate
forward
is
it?
joining us.
I can
What's that,
forward it
Kristen?
if you want. You can send it via email if you want.
Yeah, that'd be great if you could.
It's a page and a half. It's one quick point for self-storage and one quick point for ADUs.
Okay.
So we sent it yesterday. I just sent an email to Nate asking if it was forwarded, and I guess I just got the answer, and that's okay. That's all good. So thank you, Kristen.
Doug, would that have come from Nate? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I'm sorry that I didn't.
It's okay.
Okay.
I think Kristen's forwarding it now. It's not super substantial. The main meat and potatoes were the two memos that are in the packet that was posted last week. This is just a couple minor addendums that came up. So.
Okay, we'll give Marty a couple more minutes here. I did get a message from him earlier that he was joining us. He originally had a conflict but that changed. So we'll give him another minute and he'll join us.
Did that come through okay? I just sent it. I think I got everybody.
I just got it.
Okay.
And just, if I may, just so you know, the Kristen did reach out to the prior interested parties that we had emails for with regards to the self-storage to make sure that they were apprised of this virtual meeting. Whether or not the council wishes to solicit input is of course up to you guys, but we felt as though we should ensure that they were apprised that there are some revised standards and we're trying to be inclusive. So
Yeah, appreciate that, Doug. And since I don't see Marty yet, we'll go ahead and get started and hopefully he'll join us momentarily. So I'd like to welcome everyone to the Town Council Workshop of March 14th, 2023. You can see we are fully remote due to the forecasted storm. I'll start with roll call. Councilor Curtis,
Yes, I'm here, present.
Councilor McGuire,
Present?
Councilor Chapel,
Present.
and I am Councilor Carter, and we have town staff with us as well as the town manager, Nate Rudy. I'll just ask the two planning department staff to identify themselves when they begin speaking for the record. This workshop, we have a couple of items on the workshop. The first is the self-storage ordinance. And as we are all aware, the council held couple of workshops, discussions with the planning department staff, Doug and Kristen. They then went and developed a self-storage ordinance. It went through the ordinance advisory committee for feedback. It went came back to the council for a first read. We had a public hearing, which was very well attended, and we received lots of good feedback. And then it also went to the planning board, and they held a public hearing as well and received additional feedback and provided their own. Then the planning department staff took all of that information and has updated the ordinance draft that we were working with. And that is the purpose of tonight's workshop, is for them to share the updates with the council and to obtain any additional feedback from us, and to give them some direction on some items that are outstanding. The next steps would be for us to come to an agreement on the content of the changes, and then to move this back to a first reading where we will hold another public hearing to allow for additional feedback. It will go back to the planning board and then to second read. We do have a moratorium in place, and so we are under a little bit of a time crunch to ensure that we get our changes on the record before the moratorium expires. So with that summary, I will hand it over to Doug and Kristen. I think Doug will probably take the lead, but feel free to go between the two of you to kind of walk us through the material. There is a memo which starts on packet page 2.
thank you, Doug Webster, planning director, and as the chair pointed, I think it starts on council packet page 2, I think, but either way, only one page. Let's see, I can step through sort of the basic proposed changes. Would that be a good approach, do you think? Or okay. The first is the definition of self-storage facility, and that's pretty much the same, although it's been a little bit, it's proposed to be a little bit simplified as reflected in the, is that the change? Oh, no, it's the ADU, isn't it?
Yeah, you're gonna want to use the version. So I said, Kristen, not community planner, you're gonna want to use the version of the definition reflected in the addendum. That's the most updated one for the council's review.
Okay.
On a point of information, if I could ask to, if you would tell us what packet page number you're on when you address a particular portion of it, that would be helpful.
Understood.
Yep.
So
For the
Kristen,
definition, you're looking at the addendum though. The one we just emailed.
so the definition is on the first page, I believe, of the addendum, and the most substantive, it just simplifies it actually, because there are performance standards housed in further on, it made sense to simplify the definition. And the old definition in response to Councilor McGuire's understandable request is on council packet page 3. And in accordance with, I'm still on town council packet page 3. In accordance with prior discussions, the short-term proposal is to have self-storage facilities only be allowed in the light manufacturing overlay district. And so that changes some of the elements of the uses table. Again, with the long term, based on prior conversations, with the long term being that where self-storage facilities are proposed to be located within new zoning districts, that will be an integral part of the new zoning, but in order for the short term, only allowed in the light manufacturing overlay district, which is the most northerly and the most southerly commercial district, but not the commercial district immediately to the south of Great Plaza.
Okay, and Doug, I'm just gonna jump in for just a second. I think the first amendment that is shown on my package is definitions, but I think the definition it in section 402.2.2. And I think the amendment, correct me if I'm wrong, Kristen, is is further down in 40. I'll make sure we're in the right area here.
Yeah, I had that mixed up. I'm sorry. I put it in the chat. Doug, you're right. The addendum is related to ADUs. Sorry, I am sick, not firing on 100%.
No, I think there is a storage one, but the storage one is for 40265. So why don't we go, how about this, Doug? Let's use the actual labels and the packet page. And I think that'll make it easier for us to follow along. So on packet page 2 at the top, there's a question about outdoor storage, and we're going to come back to that, Doug. I'd like to go through the changes on the self-storage ordinance, and then we'll loop back to see if we want to do anything additional.
Okay.
So we'll start with the amendment number 1, which is that 402.2.2, which is on packet page 3, excuse me. And then I think when we get to that 406, we can jump in with the amendment. I think that'll be a little less confusing.
Okay, in terms of the max size per.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
Understood that.
And
makes
it's okay, Kristen. We know you're not feeling well. So brain fog is real when you're not well.
Did we get sorry to interrupt, did we get an updated packet? Or is the packet that was available on the website, or the one that we got in our email, is that the one we're using? Because on packet page 3, I don't see what you're referring to, Sandy.
Oh, okay. Maybe I have an outdated one. Hold on. I will.
Is there more than one? I guess that's the first question.
I don't believe so.
No,
Okay.
there isn't more than one, but what's likely, yeah, I just opened the one on packet page 3, Dan, and from the website. And so you should be seeing proposed zoning ordinance amendment number 1.
I see that. Okay.
Okay,
And
that's
now
the
you
one. So if you
reference-
keep going all the way to the right, there's the label. They're kind of hidden, the labels, but I think it'll be a little easier for us to follow along.
Yeah, if we use the bold labels, I think we should be able to zero in on it pretty easy. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, you're
Oh.
welcome. Go ahead, Doug.
No, it's all good. It's all good. Clarity is important. So I will use the bold label as well as the town council packet page. Okay, good. We're all on the same page, hopefully, literally. Okay. So the definition, the proposed definition is as stated, a proposed zoning ordinance change, amendment number 1, town council packet page 3. That is as proposed. And don't think there are many.
I think this one really addressed the climate controlled question that we received in feedback. So, and then the outdoor versus indoor. And just
Yes,
making sure. So, yeah.
And we were silent on the climate controlled, but there seemed to be support for specifically including that, which is what the change is intended to reflect.
Right. Dan?
Thanks, Sandy. On packet page 2, under the bold heading of self-storage facility, on the second line where the red underline begins, it says inclusive of those that are climate controlled with limited outdoor storage. Can you define limited for me, Doug or Krista?
The limited outdoor storage is addressed specifically within the performance standards. That's one of the policy questions, is if outdoor storage is intended to be a standalone use. And so the performance standards that we'll get to, presumably, specify a maximum size of outdoor storage, but the outdoor storage has to be part of a larger self-storage facility. But we
I
wanted to
understand
make it-
that. Yeah,
Okay.
and the you guys had picked 3/4 of an acre for the size of outdoor storage, which makes sense to me, except it also makes sense to me to just like round that off to 32,000 square feet or whatever, but that's not a big issue. But will there be a reference from here to that point? Because limited seems like something that needs to be defined. So if instead it said, outdoor storage parentheses, and then the reference to whatever that.
The intention in the definition was merely to make sure that the reader was aware that outdoor storage is permitted, but there are limits. And further on in the definition, it says it makes a specific reference to the performance and design standards.
Okay, yep, that's okay.
So,
Good enough for me, thanks.
Okay. If that's clear. So, okay.
Yep, that's good enough. Yep.
So proposed zoning ordinance amendment number 2, town council packet page 3 is in line with the prior policy guidance from the council, with for short term only allowing self-storage facilities subject to the performance standards and design standards in the light manufacturing overlay district. Addressing the more global, if towns are globe, issue as an integral part of the forthcoming new zoning.
Right, and I just want to take a moment to clarify that for anyone who's watching or will watch or is participating. The goal here is that it does seem very restrictive that it's only allowed in a small section of town. But the goal long term is that it will likely be allowed in other places, particularly potentially the transitional zones, there are more of those. And as part of the comp plan work, that will be considered. And so I know it came up in the public hearings, and I just wanted to reiterate the plan there.
Okay. Dan, I don't want to.
I think that's the same hand you had up
Oh.
before, Dan.
Okay.
No, it wasn't.
New
Sorry.
one? Wait,
Yeah.
okay, try again. Sorry.
Well, the where we talk about self-storage shall not be principal accessory uses related to medical marijuana, et cetera. The last phrase, unless expressly authorized herein, is it authorized within the ordinance at all?
That language came directly from Alyssa. I
Because I
can,
don't think it is allowed within the ordinance, is it?
Is she maybe saying, Dan, that it's prohibited and the only way that it would be allowed is if we updated the ordinance to specifically allow it?
I think so, but from my standpoint, if I read that and I was interested in doing that, then I would immediately start to search to see if there was where in the ordinance that would be allowed. So if it's not allowed, I would think we could just eliminate that phrase, but Alyssa trumps me any day of the week, so I don't know.
Perhaps it's in reference to the larger document that this zoning ordinance subsection is housed in, because it's part of our general zoning ordinance with various chapters. Perhaps it's in reference to the larger document it's housed in.
Could be, yeah, I don't know.
Nate?
Alyssa's language implies that like the herein implies that there could be such permission given, and under your current policy on marijuana, it's not, but I think it's you could either remove it now for clarity or leave it, consider it innocuous and leave it in if there is such time that you do provide provisions for that to be allowed.
If I may, I'd like to solicit Alyssa's input on this. I'm very cautious with regards to the cannabis language. There's a lot of eyes watching it, understandably. And
Yeah, I
she-
would just check with her and
Yep.
make sure that our interpretation is correct. And if she advises we should leave it in, we'll leave it in.
Very good. I have it on my punch
But
list.
if she says it doesn't matter, can we strike it?
Yeah, I think if she verifies that it's really there for a later update, then, and it's not mandatory, Dan, then I would say yes.
Understood. Thank you. Let's see, proposed zoning ordinance number 3, so the bottom of town council packet, page 3. That is adding in the self-storage to the light manufacturing overlay district, as I just touched upon.
Michael, did you have your hand up or?
Yes, I just have a brief question. So with the, this goes back to the end of 402.2.2, the last few sentences pertaining marijuana facilities and establishments. If that ordinance is changed in the future to allow these establishments to come to town, would we have to come back and change this specific ordinance to allow that? Or would we just have to put verbiage in the new ordinance for the marijuana facilities to be legal in the town? What do we do about that?
I'm going to field that.
Yes, yes.
So what would happen when and or if the point in time comes that there's a policy shift with the town stance and there are changes to what is allowed with regards to cannabis? What would happen as an integral part of what was being added? There would be a word search done, and every section of, because remember, this is part and parcel with a zoning ordinance.
Right.
So there'd be a word search that would be done, and the requisite sections of the zoning ordinance would be changed to reflect the new policy direction that would be part of the amendment.
Wonderful. Thank
Does that-
you.
Does that answer your question?
Sure does.
Okay.
And I will just note for the record that Counselor Meany has joined us. Go ahead, Doug.
Thank you. Let's see, zoning. Design standards, there was one minor change to the design standards, I believe. Want to remember if I printed that.
I believe it was solar panels on the roof.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you. Yep, and yeah, Kristen put that together. That was in direct, that was one of the comments that came up. And the understandable question that was posed is what happens if a new or rebuilt facility wish to add solar panels? And so there's some on-point language about that that would be looked at by the planning board as part of their review of the project and the design standards.
And that's on packet page 18. So packet page 4, proposed zoning amendments number 4 says see attached, and it's packet page 18. If anyone has any feedback on the solar panel change. I thought it was a good addition. I appreciated that coming forward in the public hearing. So it's like you're clear, Doug, to go on to amendment number 5.
Okay, so this is proposed zoning amendment number 5 at the top of town council packet, page 4. And this is in response, so this is, there are 2 parts to this. The understandable question that was posed is why can't an existing facility be rebuilt? And so there's proposed on-point language within the performance standards, but because it's conceivable that there would be one or more facilities that would be deemed as non-conforming, lawfully non-conforming because they were approved and built prior to this ordinance change, we felt as though it was important to be clear about that. And so towards the bottom of the page, Town Council Packet, page 4, we added a 3 lowercase d section to be clear that this not the general non-conformance standards in the zoning ordinance. There's an exception as detailed in the performance standards for self-storage. I don't know if that all that makes sense. I know that's a mouthful. But we felt as though if we're going to have, we didn't want there to be a conflict between, if there were a conflict between the performance standards for the rebuilding, we wanted to be clear in the general non-conformance section that it was indeed intended to be allowed.
Anne?
So in 3D, then self-storage facility standards includes the design standards.
It's detailed. It's detailed further on. This is merely the reference to make sure that it was clear that the intent was to have a limited exception for self-storage facilities in the event that the code officer could say, hey, wait a minute, you're a non-conformance, you're subject to 40265 A3. And we wanted to be clear that the property owner has the ability to do the rebuilding in alignment with the standards that are in the performance standards.
Yes, and I guess my question was, or I guess my question is that any reconstruction of the site would have to comply with the new design standards. That's my question.
I believe, I'm trying to remember how that fell out. Yes, that's coming up on Town Council Packet, page 6.
Okay, great. I'm just
So-
having trouble knitting the pieces together, I guess.
This is similar to, it sounds like it's off track, but it's right on point. Residential open space subdivisions, planning board has to be granted that authority in the zoning ordinance, even though it's part of subdivision review. And so it's important to be clear that there is an exception to the general nonconformance that's applicable for self-storage facilities.
Yeah, no, I get that. I think that makes sense. It's just not clear to me at this point that the design standards also apply. But
And they do. Yep. And that's further on.
and I don't know if we can just add that to the end of the sentence, or if not, if you want to leave it the way it is, that's fine. But it seems, again, to me, the first time you come in contact with the information, it makes sense to be clear about what that expectation is.
If there were to be a rebuilding of a facility, they're probably not going to be going to 6.5. They're going to be going right to the 811. So
Okay, all
this
right,
is
that's fine. Just
it's sort of the enabling legislation, if you will. So
maybe you're all learning way too much about how my brain works. On 3, my only other suggestion is that we set that the reconstruction, that it must be restored or reconstructed within 1 year of the date of damage or destruction. That feels, especially with supply issues and who knows God what else would crop up, that feels fairly tight. I mean, I was thinking that perhaps they must begin construction or must pull a permit within 1 year of the event. That felt like it would put a little bit more flexibility in there. I don't know how you and Kristen feel about that, but
Like something that would officially notify the town that they're, they made an insurance.
they would have to
claim
pull
and
a
they're-
permit within a year. Yeah.
Yeah,
And then having a permit, also dictates a certain end time too. So
And this 1 year, I mean, that's part of the general provisions that's already in the ordinance for non-conformance. If that's going to get revisited, I think that I would submit that that's a separate discussion.
Let me ask this question, Doug, because I believe it actually has come up on a project before. How is that normally handled if someone has received approval, pulled it, and is supposed to proceeding, and they have some sort of problem getting materials or a delay in their construction, and is there a remedy for them to go back and say, I'm being delayed for X? Already a process.
And in zoning land, they call it a sunset clause. And it depends on the type of application. There is that type of administrative relief built into both site plan and subdivision.
Okay, so I'm okay with leaving the language, providing, as long as there's a route for them to communicate if there's some extenuating circumstance.
So that was.
Sounds like there would be, so.
For site plan and subdivision, if it was a building permit, I'd have to check with Tammy because there's a little bit of an interface between zoning and the building permit administration and the building code. But the general rule is you need to have a substantial start within a year.
Yeah, and that may not mean, they've got the building up. It just means they've started, so I'm okay with it.
Okay.
Yeah, that's my only concern. I mean, it's quite possible that it might take 14 months or 15 months to finish construction. And this seems pretty black and white, that it's got to be done within a year.
Yeah,
But if there is an administrative mechanism for it to be expended, and I think I can't remember the instance, but once or twice over the last 6 years, I seem to remember something coming up where someone couldn't finish within the time. Well, the solar project's a good example of that. They
Exactly.
came to planning board. Would a reconstruction of a self-storage facility have to come to planning board?
That's again coming up on council
Okay.
packet page 6. So,
All right,
you're,
thank you.
it's almost like you've done this ordinance work before, Counselor.
Well, I never mind. Thanks for answering my question.
So the only other proposed change to 40265, which again, most of it has been on the books for many years, is on 3/4 of the way down town council packet page 5, a proposed new number 4. So what we just looked at addressed repair and replacement, and the proposed new number 4 addresses expansions. And again, it's intended to be a clear reference that there are, within the confines of the performance standards, there are options for expanding an existing facility.
Michael, did you have a question?
Yeah, it was more of a comment just to tack on to what Dan was saying about the re-permitting and the timeline for the permitting with the sunsetting. I remember we were finishing our basement and it was just poor laziness that, a 6-month project turned into a 3-year project. So we had to go back and resubmit and pay for an extension on the permit. Is that something they could do here where, you have the sunset clause, but if it is taking longer for building materials or someone gets sick, to have an additional fee to extend that permit time, possibly make it a little easier that way?
That's more of a code question for your example, because that's building permit. That's a little bit easier. As I said a couple minutes ago, I think we need to be, I would recommend that the town be very careful how you handle this non-conformance. Non-conformance is it's a really delicate thing. This section is actually the section that triggered the Britain Lumber CZA, actually.
Yep.
And we lean on it regularly for non-conforming zoning uses. So I can talk with Tammy about that because your question is related to building permit administration as opposed to non-conformance with zoning,
With
which I would
actual
submit is
zoning more.
a very separate topic that needs to be handled very carefully.
Got it. Thank you for
But-
clarification.
Yep, and I will talk with Tammy about easier mechanisms for situations similar to that you described, so.
Thank you.
Yep, sure. Okay, so that's it for 4265. And let's see, proposed zoning ordinance amendment number 6 at the bottom of town council packet, page 5. We've got compared to the old language, we just inserted the date in there to be clear. And there's also at the end of one, I'm at the top of town council packet, page 6. That's a mouthful. And this is intended to address a specific planning board approval for a self-storage facility that has had trouble getting the materials and so forth. And so that this sentence at the end is intended to ensure that that prior planning board approval is locked in line with the council adopted language with the moratorium. It's put in there to protect that property owner.
Dan?
Thanks, Andy. The applicability piece, Doug, that starts on 5 and spills over onto 6.
Yep.
Would the project that was already begun down by the Meadows, would that be considered a new application under this ordinance or no?
That's the project that the last sentence is intended to address, in line with the policy decision that the council made with regards to the applicability of the moratorium.
So is the answer yes, it does apply to that?
The answer is that current planning board of that project as approved is okay to go as approved.
Okay.
That's,
right.
that's what that last sentence is intended to address on point.
Okay. And then in number 3, repairs,
Okay.
where
Yes.
where it says the third line down, building in a self-storage facility for the same size and height and location.
Mhm.
What do you mean by size? Do you mean the
Footprint.
same footprint?
Footprint. Yeah. The intention. So there was expansion above that. I just wondered, are there any questions or comments with expansion? Maybe, and I'm just trying to step.
Oh, sorry.
No.
Yeah, sorry, Doug. I did have one on expansion, but
Okay.
we can either come back to it or address it now, whichever is easier.
Go ahead, Krista, and then we'll move on to Dan's.
Okay, so on expansion, it says on line 5, it says for the expanded portion of the development and associated infrastructure. It sounds like what we will not be instituting the design standards for the original portion of the building, but only for the expanded portion. Am I interpreting that correctly?
Yes. Yes.
I'm
Exactly.
just thinking that might be kind of incongruent and odd at times if the expanded portion has all these amenities that we've added through the design standards, but the original building doesn't. I'm just thinking that might look quite odd.
Yeah, that's kind of a tough one, Krista, because
Yeah.
forcing them to upgrade to the original to meet design standards is probably prohibitive, but you don't want to continue the non-design standard approach. So I mean, I think for most part, they're probably, if they're expanding, going to be a separate building. Not to say that that's not always the case, but
Right.
I mean, I
recognize.
paused here too, and I was
Yeah.
like, what's the solution then?
Right. I kind of just, I mean, it's not necessarily going to look funky, but it very well could. And I understand the intent with not making them redo their existing building. But
Dan?
I don't know.
Perhaps we can give the planning board some leeway to
Yeah.
decide on this one.
And
Doug?
if I may, And if you look up on the fourth line in number 2 there, packet page 6,
Mhm.
practically achievable self-storage for performance standards and design standards as determined by the planning board. So that's that
Okay.
was the language that said, okay, for both performance standards and design standards, planning board gets to determine what's practically achievable as part of their review. That was the intent.
And that's,
I guess I'm concerned with not just what's practically achievable, but what also is aesthetically pleasing. I mean,
well,
I
I
know
think, wouldn't that be a consideration, Dan? You've been at the planning board meetings in more detail than us. Is that something that they keep in mind when they're looking at the practicality of it? I mean, they
Well, I
want it
think
to
that-
look nice too.
They do, but without specific, I mean, it's kind of like buffering without specific standards. Then the planning board kind of feels a bit adrift as to what to require. This is a little different because if you have an existing facade and you have damage or an addition or something, I think Krista raises a good point. It could look as much of a mess as the original, if not maybe more, if you glue together two completely different facades. So,
Oh.
but when I read number 3, Doug, I don't see the planning board's flexibility in that.
It's in black. It's not new language.
yeah, it was under number 2 under expansion.
I-
Yeah, it's
Yes, I
expansion.
understand.
Yeah.
Expansion and repairs and replacement are intended to be treated separately here.
So if they have an existing 3-building self-storage and they want to add a 4th, and they're expanding their operation, the 4th the planning board should look at the defined standards and where practical, apply them to that 4th.
And that's the intention. Then that if you look at expansion, that goes to planning board. There's also the 300 foot in there. So because the intention was to not encroach into that 300, unless it's there already. So expansion goes to planning board and rebuilding goes to code officer with input from town planner. We tried to make the distinction between expansion and replacement, rebuilding.
So Krista, to your point, do you think adding the word practical and aesthetically would solve your
I
concern?
think that, and also differentiating between an expansion of a separate building versus an expansion onto an existing space. Because you can have more than one building on a plot. Say you start with 2 and you want to expand into 3 or 4 buildings. That's different than if you're just adding more units to an existing structure. I don't know what the wording would be to differentiate there.
Well, an addition versus a new structure, I think. Is
Right,
what I'm
yeah.
hearing you saying, yeah.
Yeah.
And just as a quick footnote, expansion of use is a defined term in the beginning of the zoning ordinance, but we can
Okay,
add.
sorry.
No, that's right on point. Adding a building on point and add in the aesthetics. Is that what?
Yeah,
Okay, sure. That's easy. Okay.
Okay, good.
Nope, you guys are so thorough. This is good. So, anything else on expansions?
No, that was it. That was all I had for that piece.
Okay. All right. So number 3, packet page 6, replacement or repairs, replacement, rebuilding. And this is again on point with the understandable question that came up, and this puts the authority right in the code officer's lap with input from the town planner. And if there were a disagreement, then it could be appealed to ZBA as with any code officer decision.
Dan?
My only question is on going back to the same size phrase. What's the common vernacular throughout zoning? Is it footprint? Because I know footprint is used in some instances, or is it size? And if there is a common vernacular, whatever that is, I think we should use that. Footprint means something very specific to me. Size is a little more nebulous.
And I wrestled with that, and I thought about footprint, but then, okay, let's say the existing building had a 10-12 pitch, and they wanted to make it a flat roof, so it would be more institutionalized. And so I took the use, I removed footprint and put in size to take in footprint and volume of the building. The goal, I think, is to ensure that it can be rebuilt as it was approved, not increase the volume, not increase the height, that type thing. I thought that was the intent. Maybe I'm wrong.
I don't disagree, but I guess thinking of it from the 100,000 foot level and zoning in our zoning ordinances, are we introducing a new term that needs to be understood and defined by using size?
I was trying
Because
to,
I would not have assumed what you just told me when I read the word size. And if it's not a big deal, I'll stop talking and we can move on. But I'm hesitant to introduce new concepts without defining them somewhere from a consistency standpoint across all of our zoning ordinances.
and I was just trying to keep it user friendly. I mean, we could get as technical. I mean, Shoreland, the old Shoreland talks about volume, and I mean, well, you guys know I can be technical.
Yeah. I was just gonna say, I think that that's an interesting line of thought, Dan. When I thought of size, I thought of the exact example that Doug just said. I mean, footprint is restrictive in where it's located in the actual.
Yeah, it's the
dimension.
perimeter is what the footprint
Yeah,
is.
exactly. But at the same time, you could have upward, and Shoreland's the one that came into my brain when I was prepping for this because of the recent changes where they're trying to help allow people to expand, but without making it a larger footprint because they're trying to also protect the lakes.
No,
So
fair enough. And it does say height right next to it. So
Yeah.
perhaps I'm splitting hairs.
but it may be something, to add to that process of us trying to streamline and to, be as standardized as we can. So
Well, and I think as we,
good
I think
term
it-
to add to
Yeah.
that list to say, here are the various terms. How do we use them and make sure we're trying to be as consistent as possible?
yeah, I think we should just move on myself. My only other thought is that I think that when we think about our formatting and sort of having an ultimate style guide for the ordinances, it would be nice if there was a way to highlight all the words in the ordinances for which there is actually a definition. So that when you're reading an ordinance, you see that word, you go, okay, I know if I go to the section on definitions, I'm going to see that.
That like a glossary,
That's
Dan, like a glossary sort of situation at the end of it.
ultimately, yeah. But I mean, I think that's a very long range sort of thing that we can't just start with one ordinance. But I think that would be helpful and make our ordinances a lot more user friendly. So, but yeah, I'm fine with this the way it is. Thanks, folks, for letting me have the discussion.
Okay, thanks, Dan.
The building codes actually do that. Any term that's defined, the IBC, the IRC, if it is a defined term, it's used in italics. But okay, so let's see. Number 6 is intended. It's a reminder that if outdoor storage is added, that it needs to comply with standards. We were trying to be clear that if there's an existing facility and they were proposing to add outdoor storage, the outdoor storage needs to comply with the standards in the section. Just a sort of a reminder, if you will. So let's see, minimum setbacks. That hasn't. I don't think that, I'm trying to remember what happened to the turnpike. That's been crossed out. I believe that was added somewhere.
Yeah, it's
further.
further
It's
on.
added
There's,
somewhere else.
That's what I
Yeah.
thought. Okay. I'm just
Krista,
trying to remember.
you have a question?
Yeah, just a point of information for me and anyone listening. I know that the setbacks we've determined are pretty high at 300 feet. And we had a good discussion around it multiple times. I don't necessarily want to get into it again. I'm just curious, what would be the minimum setback to allow for additional development closer to the road front? Is 300 feet the minimum?
So
For-
I think you do need to kind of preface a little bit, Krista. The 300-foot intention was to allow mixed use on a
Right.
site and have the storage, self-storage beyond the frontage and then
Right.
allow. And so your question then is if somebody is taking that step to do that mixed use, what's the setback for that use within the 300?
Well, kind of. I'm
Kind of.
wondering how much land in front of the self-storage unit do we need in order to allow for that development to occur? Like, is 300 feet the minimum, or could it be 200 feet?
And I thought we talked about that before.
I think we
and
did, and I might have, I probably forgot. That's why I'm raising it
time-
again.
By the time you have some buffering up front and then the building and, parking, stormwater and, that's.
Space between that business and the self-storage.
So 300 feet's the minimum.
That's it. And I understand that there are those that would like that less. The reason for proposing the 300 was to allow for, in the example that Councilor Carter just used, a mixed use development or a different type of use on the front portion, keeping the self-storage completely separate.
Right, and I agree with that approach because I definitely want to see things on the road frontage that are going to create a diversity of traffic and business opportunities for the town. I'm just trying to balance that with the needs of landowners. So I just want to make sure that when we say 300 feet, that's going to be, it's not overreaching on the.
If I remember right, Krista, and I don't have the notes on it, but when this first came up, I thought they had run some numbers on a basic commercial calculation on, what space would be available for all of the things that Doug just advised, and then what size building would that accommodate?
Okay, yeah, I know we've discussed it. I just failed to write down the exact numbers before, so I just wanted to raise it.
And one of the templates that I looked at was a 10,000 square foot office building, and just for reference, Pennell is about 10,000 square feet. And if you think about the distance from the flagpole to Main Street, I didn't measure it, but I'm guessing it's right around that. And
Okay.
that together with looking at the cumulative footprint necessary for a standalone commercial development, parking, stormwater, septic, building proper, the whole thing.
Okay. Thank you for going over that again. I appreciate it.
Dan?
Yeah, I just wanted to throw in that recently I was driving down 202 in Manchester, and there is a new self-storage facility that's been built exactly to this, what we're proposing. It is set back, it's in a field basically, but it's set back 300 feet at least it looks about 300 feet from the road, which would allow for, additional use or improved use or even just mixed use right along 202. So I think we're not alone, I think, in wondering how to fit these in with everything else that's going on.
That's good to know. Thanks. Doug?
Okay, so I'm on, let's see, council packet page 7D. I don't think there's too many, well,
Well, I think this is
This is-
the addendum one.
so what's proposed here in line with the prior policy guidance from the council, we cap the footprint for 1 story as well as the footprint in square feet for 2 story. Again, recognizing that this could be cold, if you will, storage as well as what do they call it? Climate controlled. One of the questions that came up since this was drafted was, this is in the addendum, should there be a cap on the maximum size of a rental facility? And I think what's happened in other municipalities is they'll have so we have a cap on the building size, but and I think the default impression is that, you know, these self-storage facilities, whether they're climate controlled or 1 stories that you drive right up to, that they're small. I mean, generally small. I mean, they're 10 by 20 maybe as the biggest size. But I think what other municipalities may have had some issues with is, yes, the building meets the size requirement, but the size of the individual rental unit is big, and it's being utilized, let's say, by a contractor for storage of equipment and maybe even vehicles, and that wasn't really the intent. And so the policy question becomes, is it appropriate to cap the maximum size of the individual rental unit?
Okay, thanks. Do you guys want to kind of chime in on your thoughts on this? And I'm gonna make Dan start first. Oh, just lose him? Oh, he said no and left.
Darn.
Oh, I was just putting a note in the chat. My lights are flickering a
Me
lot, so,
too.
and
Yeah,
he's
mine-
up the
Here he
road.
comes.
He's up the road from me, so.
Yeah. Krista, what do you think?
I don't really have a I think as long as we're limiting the size of the overall building, I think we should leave it up to the developers to determine the size of their individual units. I don't really have strong feelings on limiting that.
Dan, what do you think?
Sorry, I lost my internet connection. But the cell phone's still working, so I'm back. But I missed the part of the conversation. The only thing about size, the only size question I had really was about width. Is there a maximum width that we would want for a building? Or, you know, like a big for one of these facilities. I mean, I realize if you have a warehouse, you can end up with huge sizes, but that was the only question I had.
Yeah, and that, and
Because
I'll let,
7,500 square feet is a lot of,
yeah,
it could be 75 foot wide by 100-foot building. And would that be okay?
okay, we'll let Doug respond to that, but one of the things that he's asking is we're limiting the size of the building. Do we want to also limit the size of the individual units? So some municipalities
Oh,
have run
sorry, I
into
missed
a
that.
couple. Yeah, that's on the addendum that Kristen sent. And
Yep.
some municipalities have just found that, you know, somebody builds a building and they end up with just 2 units and they're renting it out more as a working commercial garage almost because the contractor's in there.
Yeah, workshop.
And
yeah.
so do we care or do we want to limit that or not?
I guess I don't feel a great need to limit it. I would think use would take care of that. I mean, you wouldn't be able to use a self-storage facility for a woodworking shop if maybe that's the piece that we would have to address if there's some concern.
Okay, Doug, do you want to answer his question about the width and then I'll go to Michael and Marty?
The width, yeah, and I played around with different footprint configurations and I landed on the square feet because I was trying to give some flexibility to whoever wants to build these. Maybe they want something that's long and thin, and so that again, very similar to the 300 foot. There's no magic to the 7,500, but it just felt as though that's about as big a building that sort of works for gray scale, I guess.
And I guess I don't necessarily have an objection. It just posed the question in my mind, you know, is a 75 foot by 100 foot building, would that be okay? I can't think of a problem myself, but I just wanted to raise it.
And part of my reasoning again is that it's set back so far from the road that, okay, well, if it's away from the road, then it's perhaps that size is not as important as it might be if it was right up on the road.
Sandy, while we're at it, do you mind? I had some other comments about the minimum setbacks.
Yeah, I'm just gonna let Michael and Marty chime in on the size restriction on the units, and then I'll toss it right back to you. Michael, what are your thoughts on restrictions on individual unit size?
So I think the square footage should cover that, but I was also thinking maybe a cap on how many units instead of, you know, minimum, how many units they can have maximum. Because I mean, I'm thinking if they've got this and they want to, you know, build a few units, I don't want the units to, you know, be small and, you know, what if you just built 10 one-bedroom units? You know what I mean? Thinking about the lack of housing here, this could, you know, kind of roll into that. So I was thinking more of a maximum, like you can't have more than X amount of units with it instead of a minimum. But if the 7,500 square footage allows you to do X, Y, and Z, maybe that's up to the planning board to decide whether or not those units are sufficing enough to accommodate some of the housing needs in the town. So I don't know, I'm split. I'm 50-50 on it, but I'm okay with it as is, unless the planning board would be the ones to be like, you can't have more than X, Y because of this and this and that. Let them get more into the weeds on that. What do you think?
Yeah, so you're stating, you know, because of increased housing, there might be more of a need, especially rentals, to have more storage units, but you
Right.
don't want them to be too small.
Correct.
Marty, what do you think? You're still muted. While you work to unmute, I'll share mine. I'm kind of with Dan and Krista. Just let the market decide, you know, if a developer thinks there's a need for a really big unit, I guess I'm okay with that. And I agree with Dan. I think the best route there is probably usage. I think we've done a pretty good job about, you know, trying to make sure there isn't repairs going on. It's self-storage and guarding against environmental impacts. So I think if we end up needing to beef anything up, that would be where I would do it. And we'll just kind of see what happens and let the developer decide what the market needs, I guess, for size of units. Marty? Were you able to unmute there? There is a chat feature if you want to put it in chat, or you can give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down if that'll help. Thumbs up, you're okay with the market decision. Okay, thanks, Marty. Technology is great when it's working. When it's not so much fun. Okay, I think that answers that. So I will throw it back to Dan because he had some additional feedback on set.
Yeah, I just think 75 feet is for the buffer is too much. I mean, it's a lot of property. I find that one really difficult to support. And I also feel the same way about the 100-foot for outdoor storage to some extent. I mean, it could be if it was conditional on terrain or existing vegetation, I mean, or how much buffering, how much planting someone would be willing to do in order to use to make the buffer smaller. You know, you could have a 75-foot buffer that was open field, and what kind of buffering does that really provide? So I just wanted to throw out there that I'm still struggling with the 75-foot buffer, and also the buffer that's required between adjoining self-storage units. In that particular case, if they were abutting each other, what difference really would that make? And that's further on in the memo, but I'll just throw that out there. If everybody else is on board with 75.
Do we want to step through this as it's not my meeting to run, but
Well, the
Well, I thought
setbacks,
we went past that.
yeah, the
That's why
setbacks are in the previous item number C. So we'll hold off on the in-between building setbacks, but the minimum setbacks on the
oh,
foot.
I see. That's okay. I missed that.
Yeah, and I'll let Doug speak to this. I think the concern that we
C2
raised,
and 3, yeah.
yeah, I think the concern that we raised with the buffering originally was that if we end up allowing self-storage in like the transitional area, which will be a mix between businesses and residential, then, you know, it raises the importance of buffering, but I understand what you're saying. The type of buffering matters. I'd be more inclined to have
But if
the,
we allow a 5-story building.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I would be more inclined to have a more robust buffering around outdoor storage because that's less attractive than buildings with proper design standards. So, you know, somebody could potentially be staring at, you know, a boat or something on a trailer, instead of a nice looking building. So, yeah, that's a tough one. And we know that we want to look at buffering across the board. So yeah,
Well,
it's kind of a catch-22. It's like we have buffering and then we don't define it well enough. And then when we over define it, it's too much. So it's a
well,
tough.
maybe for this zone, it would be okay to, but I think that, you know, if you have a 3 or 4 or even a 5-story apartment building, you're going to see right over the 75-foot buffer. I mean,
Yeah,
the buffer is going to be meaningless if you live above the 2nd floor.
Yeah.
So just from the standpoint of using the land, is that the best use?
yeah. Go ahead, Doug.
Okay. Oh, thank you. So there are some adjustments to reduce the 75 feet, and it occurs to me that maybe there should be, we probably should not be stating that as rigidly in current C2 on page 7, if there is policy endorsement for the reduction that we'll get to further on.
Yeah, there is some leeway built in, so I agree. This needs to probably be softened or at least refer to the other.
Okay. I misunderstood why Councilor said, why is he talking about the buffer that's further along? I get it now. I stand corrected. So, okay. Good to keep going or? Okay. I'm on council packet page 8. And the proposed new 6 is all new. This is intended to address adaptive reuse for a building that exists as of March 1st of this year. So one of the elements that we looked at is we didn't want a building to be built and then a year later, a new building to be built. And then a year later, hey, I want to make this into self-storage. And so we said, okay, let's lock in buildings that are existing as of the adoption of these standards. And so these standards are, we tried to echo the, jumping down to F, we tried to echo the importance of not going closer to the road. There's a bunch of standards in here. I think we said in accordance with the comment about the applicability of the design standards, if you look at 6 lowercase c, adaptive review, planning board shall have the authority to require non-structural changes to the building in accordance with the design standards as practicable. And so that was intent. Okay, if you, it's okay if you want to do paint or maybe add a fake eave or something, but the goal was to be clear to the applicant and the planning board that we don't want to be requiring changes to the structural nature of the existing building, because it's not fair, I don't think. So anyway, with that, I'll be quiet.
Questions or comments on section 6? Dan?
Doug, does it change things if we just eliminate the word adaptive?
I don't think so.
Because adaptive reuse made me wonder what that was, actually. I would propose just having, just remove the word adaptive.
Sure, yeah.
Okay,
Or we could define it. I'm kidding. So
it's up to you.
I'm kidding. You know, I'm kidding. Okay. No, it's non-substantive. Absolutely. The harder thing was coming up with how do we characterize the standards that are applicable, but okay, sure.
Any other feedback? Looks good, Doug.
Wow. This is so funny. The parts that I think there's going to be lots of discussion on, there's not, and then this.
We like to keep you on your toes.
You're doing great. Okay, so eliminate adaptive. Okay, so the next is the general standards. Just some more administrative strike throughs. Oh, yeah, that was the number 7, bottom of packet page 9. That was in direct response to prior comments that we were inferring that it could be allowed, and so it was stricken as a result of the comment, which is fine. Council packet page 10, number 12.
Dan?
Doug, going back to packet page 9 for a second. Number 7 that you were just talking about, can we require that be reportable? Or am I misunderstanding you?
Reportable or recordable? I'm misunderstanding.
Report, like they must report any event and the tenant if there's a breach of section 7. In other words, say they have an oil spill, somebody spills gasoline, whatever, can we ask them to report that, or is that not something that we can do?
I don't know the answer to that. I don't know where that civil municipal line is between the town and the operator of the facility. And then there's the additional line from the operator to the tenant of the individual unit. There could be a reminder in there that any spill needs to be addressed in accordance with applicable state law, or I could ask Alyssa.
That would work for me probably, because, yeah, I mean, you know, like it was a gas station. If there was somebody who was pumping gas and there was a spill there, I just am super sensitive, I think, to chemicals and oil these days, especially in light of what we've been reading recently.
Ohio, yeah.
I think
Well,
later
just in general.
we address reporting standards annually if they're housing vehicles that could leak. Perhaps it would fit in that section if there was a leak of some sort. that they would need to
then-
report it.
Thanks, Krista. Yeah, that would work. That makes sense to put that there.
Mhm.
And then again, I just 5 and 6, I'm just struggling with the 75 feet there, so
That-
I'll leave that.
And they're, okay, 5 and 6, so those may need to be adjusted pending policy input on reducing that, which we're getting to. Okay. Appreciate the reminder, 5 and 6. Thank you. Number 12 is a reminder in line with the policy guidance with regards to nothing new within 300 feet. We just felt as though we're trying to be clear about that to allow the front portion to be utilized for other purposes. So here we go. I'm at the bottom of council packet, page 11. Where in this 9A through E is the proposal to reduce the 75-foot buffer in line with the comments from both council and possible future or current developers. So let's see, I'm trying to remember. It is A goes into the no chain link fencing is okay, but no chain link in line with comments, prior comments. And B is also in line with the prior comments that if I know we don't have any industrial zoning now, but at some point we may. We're trying to be clear about where it is most appropriate to consider a reduced buffer.
Yeah, and I actually wrote on my notes, I like this. So I'm sorry, I didn't think of it when we were talking about the more restrictive, and I think just putting a reference on those paragraphs that state unless otherwise approved, see section 9, you know what I mean? So that people are under the, if they're researching whether they're going to do this or not, they can understand that location matters. And that the planning board will take into consideration that location and has the authority to reduce the setbacks accordingly. And I think that helps achieve the buffering we were trying to do for residents. But as Dan said, there's circumstances where the buffering isn't going to work or it doesn't make sense. And in those scenarios, they should be allowed to reduce it. So Dan, your thoughts on this, since you brought it up earlier?
Yeah, I think, yes, that's the goal. Certainly in the commercial industrial zones, the transitional zones, I think we'd have to talk about in zones where we allow taller buildings might be another place where the buffer doesn't have as much value. That doesn't mean that there shouldn't be any buffering from a ground level standpoint, but maybe it doesn't have to be 75 feet. I think terrain also figures into it. You know, so anyways, yeah, I think that makes sense to me. I wondered if in E, Doug, if you could give us an example, a scenario for E.
E?
Yeah. On page 12.
Yes, so E was intended, so D is where it kind of goes in and provides some guidance, and it doesn't, you notice it says should, it doesn't say shall. But one of my observations from being in land use for too many years is that it's helpful for both planning boards and applicants to have some general guidance in the ordinance, but give the planning board some latitude. So that's what D is attempting to accomplish, is to lay out different scenarios and to have some suggestions for the planning board's consideration as well as the applicant.
I
In
think he
response-
asked about E.
Yes, I understand. I just wanted to be.
Okay, all right. I just want to make sure you were going to do E next.
So E is E is conceptually similar to D. So there are all kinds of different scenarios out there depending on the specific parcel that's going to be utilized for self-storage. E is intended to plant a seed with both the applicant and the planning board that there may be portions of a sideline setback that are more important. Maybe the part by the road, and the further away from the road you get, if it's if it's dropping off, the grade's dropping off. E is trying to plant the seed that you don't have to treat if you're reducing the buffer, you don't have to treat the entire perimeter or even the same sideline, the same rear line, all the same. It could be treated differently depending on what the existing circumstances are and what the abutting land use is. So that's what E is trying to do, say, listen, planning board, listen, applicant, you don't have to go down to 20 feet around the whole perimeter. There may be portions that warrant a better buffer and portions that don't.
Yep, okay, thank you. I feel I understand that now, though we keep saying give our planning board some flexibility, but one of the things they routinely ask us for is for us to make things less flexible. So there's always a tug of war between those two.
I live the dream.
Thank you.
So, sure. And I think that's it. Let's see, we're on the outdoor. Oh, and the MTA got moved to C. That's why it was stricken before. So that is in C. And I think that's it, I think. The uses table we touched upon earlier. So those are the proposed adjustments since this was last before the council.
Dan?
My only question around the end of it here, Doug, is there any need for fees associated with outdoor storage? Or is once it's done, it's done? We don't have an inspection of outdoor storage facilities. But the stormwater piece and the allowing for verification, they have to report to us by January 31st of each year. I just didn't know if there was some internal cost for us that there should be a fee associated with that. Maybe not. I'm just throwing that out there. Thank you.
I don't think so. I mean, I think the intention.
That's fine. Yep.
Yeah, the intention of the reporting is just to make sure that the stormwater infrastructure is being maintained and if there were spills and so forth, but
Okay.
I don't see, I'm happy to be corrected, but I don't see the practical necessity for adding a fee to this use that as compared to other land uses, but I'm all ears if I'm
Looks like
off.
you got looks like you got a thumbs up, but that was a great transition into the one outstanding question, which is the council was open to allowing outdoor storage at existing self-storage facilities. And the question I believe you want to pose to us, Doug, is do we want to allow outdoor storage on its own?
Yes.
So just outdoor storage somewhere. And I would prefer to not do that. That's my take. I'd like to see how this outdoor storage capacity develops with existing self-storage, and see how our new requirements go before we start allowing just outdoor storage somewhere. But that's just me. So I'm going to make the rounds here. Krista, your thoughts?
Yeah, I would definitely prefer not to have standalone outdoor storage facilities.
Dan?
Yeah, I'm okay with waiting to see how this is received.
Okay. Michael?
I agree with Krista. I don't think we should have separate outdoor storage.
Marty? He doesn't want outdoor storage either. Thanks, Marty. Poor Marty. Okay, and I just want to once again thank everyone who participated in the process, because as I think some people have the impression that once something goes to first reading, that's it. And that's actually not how it's supposed to work. We do the best that we can to have these conversations, and we move it to first read in the public hearing so that we can obtain additional feedback. And then it goes to the planning board. So I want to commend the staff and those who provided feedback, and the planning board and the OAC, because I think this product is much better for that feedback. And I think we addressed quite a few items: the rebuilding issue, the solar issue, the climate control, the reuse conversion, the buffering, giving that flexibility. So I know that the large setback, the original large setback, was also a concern, and I'm sure people are disappointed that that is not going to be changing. But I think once that additional comp plan zoning implementation happens, there'll be more parcels that will accommodate that for those who wish to pursue it. So the second item on our agenda is accessory dwelling unit changes. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about LD 2003. We're all aware that the state of Maine legislature passed some new housing requirements. They have mandated specific changes on municipalities, and we are under a deadline to comply with the new law. And they're still in the process of doing rulemaking and deciding how things are going to be done. So it's a little complicated with the deadlines fast approaching. So staff has been working with, and I think I said Alyssa in our previous meeting, it's Natalie who is working on this with staff. And she's trying to give us some staff recommendations on how to proceed. And her, I believe her first recommendation is for us to address ADUs. So with that, I am going to turn this back over to Doug to walk us through what we're looking at.
Okay. Thank you. Yes, and as you so correctly pointed out, this new legislation, there are basically three levels or three different components, I should say. This is the first. This is the ADUs. This is the one that's a little bit simpler. The other two, the rulemaking is still not done, but there will be no doubt follow-up input for the other two components. So with regards to the ADU portion of 2003, the recommendation is to utilize whatever current standards we do have in accessory apartments, but retitle this accessory dwelling unit. So the intention here is to use a new term. And so whenever you see accessory apartment, you'll know that that's part of the old approval and sort of a new title. And what Kristen and I have done is we've tried to do our level best to retain in general, my sense is that the accessory apartment standards has worked pretty well for the town of Gray. And so we thought, okay, if that's working well, yes, we need to comply with the statute, but which components of our current language do we need to change to bring ourselves in alignment with a new state statute? So that's what this intends to do. And should I step through the different pieces? Would that help, or? Okay.
Yeah, I think using a similar approach, just kind of go through your amendments, and then we'll loop back for the three policy questions that you have.
Yep. Okay. Sounds good. And this begins on council packet page 19. And on council packet page 20 is proposed zoning amendment number 1, which is a change of title. Just from accessory apartment to accessory dwelling unit. We need, in line with the required standards in the statute, we need to adjust the uses table. And that is on council packet page 24 and 25. Or I'm sorry, 23 through 25. And the prior standard had some, for small properties, the current standards require some level of, an additional level of review in line with the new state statute. They have to be allowed everywhere where on every parcel where a single family is the principal use. So we needed to change the uses table to reflect that. And let's see, I'm on council packet page.
Dan?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Doug, before you go on, where you said a zone where single family is the principal use, I think was your words. And I'm looking at the table and I just don't understand why that would be the case for, BD1, BD2 commercial. That's not the principal use of those zones.
What the statute requires, it says the parcel, the statute doesn't get into the uses allowed in the zone. What the statute says is that any parcel that has single family on it as its principal use must be allowed to have at least one accessory dwelling unit. So it's not the zoning district, it's the use of the parcel.
So it's permitted only if there's an existing residence on the property.
The way the statute reads is that any property that's currently utilized for single family purposes, irrespective of what zoning district it's in, must be allowed to allow for at least one accessory dwelling unit.
Yep, I get it, but that's a condition. So, if you're looking at the commercial zone, condition would be that there's an existing residence there for an ADU. So
That's correct.
I don't understand why everything all would be permitted, because there is a condition. The condition is that there has to be a residence there.
Okay, and so the way that's handled administratively is, let's see, I need the right page. It's subtle, but
Oh, I know it's in the language, but I guess my concern is when you come here and I look at this, it's permitted everywhere.
okay. And the administrative trigger, if you will, for the reader of the zoning ordinance is that dog bone shaped symbol that means there are performance standards that must be met.
Okay, I just think it's confusing to have all the zones labeled just permitted like that because there are conditions for it, but we can move on.
Yes, there are conditions, but in line with the statute, every lot that has a single family on it, we have to be allowing at least one ADU. And that's why we needed to adjust the table with again, the footnote to the performance standards.
Yep, I just disagree, but if I'm the only one, we move on.
Well, I
Nate,
just, oh,
wait.
sorry.
hold
Go
on
ahead.
just one second. Nate asked the question if it would help to have a footnote on the table directing them to the administrative language.
That's what that dog, I don't have the full zoning
What the
here, but
dog looks like. It's
The
hard
dog
to
bone.
see in the packet.
there is at the end of the uses table in 402 zoning, the vertical dog bone says see performance standards.
Okay, thanks.
Similar, that's how other uses are handled too. I mean, I'm not trying to be argumentative, but simply because it says that retail sales are permitted It does not exempt a party from site plan if they need it. You see what I mean? It's,
So I do see what you mean. I have to admit that I looked right over that.
the uses table is intended, I was actually present when the ORC created this table. And the table was intended to be a user-friendly summary for where different uses are allowed. It's not wholly inclusive. It doesn't talk about site plan. Other ordinances do that.
No,
would say-
I understand. It's just that those were missing from our packet, so they weren't there to reference. That's so, my bad.
Krista?
Yeah, I just had a point of clarification for me, just based on this discussion. So I understand that if there's a single family home on an existing lot within the business or commercial district, someone can add an ADU to that with this new language.
Yes.
Could someone also construct a brand new single family home and then add an ADU within those
Mhm.
same districts?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. So essentially it is allowed everywhere. Because we can
Yes.
put a single family home pretty much anywhere.
Well, but that could change with the zone.
Yeah,
Nate?
So, I mean, when we do the comp plan zoning,
Okay.
Nate? Nate?
There are also provisions in, at least in the draft language, that if you have a lot where single family housing is allowed, that the developer, the property owner can install up to 4 ADUs on that lot. I don't know if that's going to make it through rulemaking, but that was in the original language.
right. I was wondering where that went. I thought I remembered up to 4.
wondering where that went. I
Yeah.
I remembered up to
Yeah.
4.
I suspect that would be in a parcel that is zoned primarily for residential or only for residential, and not a non-conforming residence on a commercial lot or something like that.
And a growth area, I believe, but I'm happy to be wrong.
Dan?
That might be right, yeah.
Dan, you're muted.
thanks, Andy. We've spent years trying to kind of define the spaces and to find the best use for the spaces, not only for the use itself, but for tax purposes in an attempt to grow the tax base. And it's absolutely nuts to think that if you have a commercial district and you've got a gas station or you've got a 3-story bank, that in the lot next door, the best use for that is for a house. We have problems with people when they built their houses in commercial zones complaining when commerce is built, because you've got parking, you've got traffic, you've got lights, you've got the whole bit. It just doesn't make any sense to me at all.
Ongoing problem
Yes,
for
I'm hearing
sure.
we can't do anything about it, so I'll just be quiet.
Yeah, I mean, I think,
Absolute madness.
yeah, I think we were pretty good with sharing our thoughts on the LD 2003 and the fact that it undoes a lot of the good work that we're trying to do to prevent, a lot of the problems that we have to deal with. So. All right, back to you, Doug.
Okay, thank you. Packet page 20, 3/4 of the way down, proposed zoning amendment number 3, parking. In line with the language in the statute, we're not allowed to require a parking space for the ADU. Where parking is in the body, if you will, of the zoning ordinance. I wanted to be clear there that just as I said, the accessory dwelling units are not subject to parking requirements. And that's echoed further along, but that's the provision, that's the portion of the zoning that says parking's applicable. So we needed the exemption in there. It seems pretty straightforward, but comments? Oh, okay.
Why bother?
That
Well,
wasn't
we're-
meant for you. It was for the state. It's
Oh,
okay, Doug.
Okay. Like, okay, what'd I do? Okay, bottom of page 20. Which is, if you jump ahead to the top of packet page 22, that number 15 is currently a requirement in the accessory apartment. When Chris and I were looking at this, I saw this and I said, wait a minute, this is basically a home occupation standard, even though it's for an accessory apartment or an ADU, so it should be housed in home occupation. So we're proposing to merely move this from where it's currently housed in accessory apartments and add it to the home occupation performance standards. And this is one, I did solicit some OAC input on this. This was one of the points that was raised by one or more of the OAC members. Why are we only allowing one home occupation per property? Why is it not appropriate to allow a home occupation in the single family and an additional home occupation in the ADU? So I don't know if it's on the books now, but that was just to be fair, and I appreciate the input from OAC. But that was one of 4 comments from OAC with regards to this proposed language. So we can move on. I don't know what you'd like to do with that, but I just wanted to be clear about that.
Dan, you might still be muted, Dan.
I might have been. Because we can't control parking, the home occupancy piece feels like it just opens up the possibility to, I guess, issues around parking, but I guess even in this case, we can't do anything about that. Is that correct assumption?
Parking, the town presumably can regulate parking for home occupations, but it can't require parking for the ADU.
But if the ADU is used for home occupation, then we can require parking.
I don't know. That sounds like a legal
Well,
question.
So
I don't
if
think
we-
so, Dan. I think, yeah, I'm sure that's probably part of what they're wrestling with, but yeah, it's a conflict.
So then do we have to allow the ADU to be used for home occupation? I guess that's the question.
The legislation is silent on home occupations. I think the policy question for the council is in line with the question that was posed by OAC. Do you want to keep this? I think you can keep this only one home occupation per property. Do you want to keep that, or do you want to allow potentially 2 home occupations on the same property? One for the single family and one for the ADU.
Personally, I would vote 1 per property. Don't know how others feel, but I think it also speaks to we've talked about the need for a parking ordinance. Because if there's no required parking and they're parking on the street and we have a day like today and we've got to plow, then we've got to have something on the books that allows us, unfortunately, I can see us being in the position where we end up having to tow cars in order to plow.
Yeah.
So that's a future thing.
Yeah, actually, Nate has asked me to add that to our list, so that is coming up hopefully in a workshop, because we do need to get a parking ordinance on the books. And I'm with you, Dan. I don't want to mess with multiple home occupations, especially when we're just rolling this out, being forced to roll this out. I'd like to see how that pans out initially.
Okay.
Krista, do you want to weigh in on the?
Oh,
home-
I just was having a difficult time finding where it specifically said it was limited to one. I don't really have strong feelings either way. I'm fine with waiting on amending it to see how things kind of progress with this new language.
Michael?
Let's see where the cards fall and then take it from there. I don't want to have to do it twice, you know.
Marty? Thumbs up with one home occupancy.
Okay, packet page 22. Next is definition, and I believe that the addendum proposes a slightly reworded definition. And given that we have several performance standards associated with the proposed new ADU language, I believe that what Kristen was spearheading this part, I believe we simplified the definition and pulled some of the reminders, if you will, out of the definition. So if you compare the definition on council packet page 22 to the addendum, I think you'll find that it's slightly simplified. If you have performance standards, you might as well put the standards there. That's the reasoning.
I'm sorry, Doug, I was just quickly reading the additional information on our policy questions in the background. Dan?
Thanks, Sandy. Doug, are there design standards as part of the performance standards?
Design statement.
So for instance, if someone's building an ADU on a site in a neighborhood that has a defined architectural motif, can we set any expectations that the ADU sort of fit with the rest of the neighborhood? That doesn't feel like a huge obstacle to, I mean, I would think most people would want to do that anyways, but not if there isn't in the ordinance, language in the ordinance to that effect, then you could get stuck.
And
'Cause that does have an impact on other neighbors' property values too, as to what actually gets built.
so paralleling the language that's currently on the books for accessory apartments, we're jumping ahead to the packet page 30. Packet page
Okay.
30 addresses aesthetics. So we could,
Okay.
I don't know what the council wants to do, if you want to touch on this now, or if you want to keep going through, it's up to.
Nope, that's me just forgetting it's out there in the future. Sorry about that.
Nope, it's good. Good thorough review. So we took care of the home occupation, we got the uses table. And where is? So council packet page 26, at the top of the page, you can see the strike through for the parking for accessory. We just eliminated it. What happens with parking is the parking is required in the main body of the ordinance, but the actual parking standard is housed in Article 10, the site plan. So this is actually a part of Article 10, but because that's where the housing, because that's where the parking actual standard is, that's why it needs to be eliminated here in line with the statute. So let's see, that brings us to council packet page 28. General standards. We moved the shoreland provision. That's going to be one of the biggest challenges with this. Everyone's going to think, I've got an existing lot, I've got an existing house. There's a specific provision in the statute that says you must comply with shoreland zoning. Shoreland zoning says you need 80,000 square feet per dwelling unit. And so shoreland zone is not going to be able to capitalize, if you will, on this new legislation, right, wrong, or indifferent. So I wanted to put that right up front, right in line with the statute. And there is some proposed new language in A2, again, on page 28. And this language is right in line with the statute. We have to include this. And we'll get to it. One of the biggest changes is that one of the biggest changes from current accessory apartment standards, and they've been, I've looked at the old ordinances, the attached, formerly required attached nature of an accessory apartment has been on the books since it went into play umpteen years ago, before I was with the town. One of the provisions in the statute is that you have to allow you have to allow one ADU per single family property, and it does not necessarily need to be attached. It can be a detached structure. And so that's what that's one of the elements that A2 is being clear about in line with the statute. A3 is again clarifying, and the strike throughs for A3 are leftover language that we are no longer able to apply. The old E was, as an example, a reference to a lot in a residential open space subdivision. We have to allow ADUs there now, so we had to eliminate that language.
Dan?
I just had a quick question to clarify on A2, again, what you were just talking about, Doug. So if someone has an existing garage, but you could easily build an apartment above it, would they be able to do that with this language? Because that's a detached building.
That's one of the big policy questions here. And so and then we did get some guidance from state DEDC on this. And we could address that now. So if you
Oops,
build,
if it's later on, nope, that's just, it was in relation to that question. But
No, I think it's a good time to address it.
Okay.
One of the questions we have to loop back to. So if this is a good context for us to understand the question, Doug, then
sure.
let's do it.
So we're talking about detached structures on a lot that's used principally for single family purposes, okay? And the statute says that if you build you have to allow a new detached structure to be utilized, or at least a portion of it, as an accessory dwelling unit. And based on some guidance last week from a workshop that Kristen and I attended with state DECD, they said that it's up to the town. The town has their guidance is, and of course this isn't tested in the courts yet, but their guidance is this: each town has the ability to decide if they want to allow an existing detached structure to be utilized for ADU purposes. So that policy question, at least right here, right now, appears to be the town gets to decide if it wants to allow buildings existing to be utilized as an ADU. New is different, talking about existing.
Okay, so yeah, let's go around and get some input on that. Krista, what do you think?
I mean, I think I'm okay with that. If the building's already there and it has space to convert it into an apartment or something above the garage or I mean, I'm okay with that. I mean, it's in line with this new law. I don't think we should penalize people who already have a structure if other people next to them can build a brand new one and do the same thing. So I think it's fine.
Dan?
Yeah, if we're forced to do it and the goal is to provide more housing for people, if someone has a existing structure and it can be designed such that it can meet the codes and everything, I don't see why we would limit it.
Michael?
Yeah, I agree. My only question is, does that go, like, if it's an existing structure, I think I'm just gonna throw an example out there. Say someone's got like an older barn on their property that they want to rehab and turn into a rental. That process would fit here. Is that right?
It would, if the council made the policy decision, a barn detached, we're talking about existing detached structures. Could be a barn, could be a 2-car garage, could be
Correct.
anything.
All right. So yeah, I agree. I mean, I agree with everyone else. I think it's fine.
Marty? Thumbs up. Yeah, and I agree. I actually think of when we built our garage first, and we have room upstairs to do an ADU, and we were specifically told when we were building our garage, don't get any ideas, you can't put an ADU there when we built it way back when. And then we attached it to the house. We added a room that would attach it to the house. So to me, it makes no difference as far as the layout of the house and stuff, whether I should or shouldn't be able to. It would be unfair if my neighbor had the same thing but didn't attach their garage, and I, by virtue of attaching mine, could do it. So yeah, I think it's more consistent if we allow it.
Okay. Okay. But we did the recon so that we did our level best to provide what appear to be the options, and you guys set policy. That's what you do. That's good. Okay, so packet page 28 has to be single predominant. Principal use of the parcel needs to be single family. We talked about that. I'm moving on to packet page 29. That's okay.
Dan?
Yes, Andy and everybody else, if people were supportive of some sort of design standard for ADUs, would it have gone in that A2 section or in that section somewhere, Doug? I don't know if there's enough support for that, but.
Aesthetics are addressed on packet page 30.
Oh, okay, sorry.
I'm going to jump in because Kristen did put something in the chat. There is carryover language from the current ordinance requiring the ADU to match the SFH. And I don't know what SFH is, Kristen. So Doug probably does.
Single family
home. Okay, thank you very much. And Doug is talking about it's on page 30. So we'll cover that in a minute. Thank you. Go back to Doug.
Yeah. Yep. Just trying to be respectful. Okay. So I'm on packet page 29, renaming in the new number 4. Some strike throughs to bring it in line with the statute. That language is will soon to be a dinosaur from for small lots. Number 6 in the middle of the page there, again, page 29. The minimum 100, so we're talking about a minimum and a maximum of finished living area for the ADU. The minimum of 190 comes directly from the statute, and the 660 has been on the books for a long time. And the 660 cap was the second of 4 elements that there were OAC comments about. The OAC, at least most of the OAC, I believe, felt as though, although they may not always agree with the legislation, if we are going to implement this legislation, having a square foot cap is inconsistent with the intent of the legislation. That was the argument that was posed. So the question be the 190 we have to keep that statute. The question is, does the council wish to keep the 660 finished living area cap? That I think is the policy question.
Krista?
Yeah, I would agree with the feedback from OAC. I mean, it feels a little arbitrary, the 660 square foot number, especially if people still have to abide by the lot requirements related to a single family home. I mean, if they have space to build more than that and it fits within their lot, I don't think we need to limit it, especially if it's not aligned with the intent of the law. So,
Dan?
Is there an instance where, maybe this doesn't matter, is there an instance where the ADU could actually be larger than the primary residence?
Yes, yep. And the
And-
history,
and-
the history with the 660, I was part of ORC when this got drafted. The 660 was basically the footprint of a average size 2-car detached garage. The thinking at the time at which accessory apartments, 660, was drafted was someone could attach a 2-car garage to their house, and the second floor of the garage could be the mother-in-law, could be the accessory apartment. That's where it came from.
So I don't know if there's a good reason for limiting or not. I haven't thought of one, I have to say, but it would seem odd if the ADU is larger than the existing structure. And maybe that would be the limit.
I mean, there's so many people out there with giant garages and tiny houses. Like, if you're just adding on to that or creating a structure that's similar to something that is already existing in town, I don't see the need to limit it personally.
It could be larger than the single family if you take the cap off. But
Yeah.
Well, I
and
guess
Chris-
oh, go ahead, Sam, sorry.
Sorry. Chris, are you talking about my house? Is that what you're talking about? Only
No.
kidding. My husband grew up on a farm in Iowa, so the garage is closer to a barn than a
Yeah,
garage.
well,
That's
when we were-
accurate.
When we were
Sorry.
looking at houses, our realtor was like, some people are looking for a barn with a house.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
like,
But I will say that the upstairs though is substantially smaller, obviously, because the bays are very large with the garage. So there is a little push and pull with the size, even if they're larger. Having some experience just with my daughter now living in Houston, there's a lot you can do with like 750 square feet. I mean, they have all kinds of apartments that size or smaller, 660. So my only concern would be, and I kind of like where you're going, Dan, maybe the single family home is the limit, but I'm leaning towards more of having some type of cap so that we're not creating a situation where they're building 2 houses essentially, because that's not what the ADU is either. I don't believe that's the intent. It's supposed to be a smaller unit, something that you have your in-laws with to help with beginner housing. And so I am a little concerned of having no cap. I'm not sure 660 does seem a little small. So, maybe it's a little bit higher than that, but I'm actually more leaning towards a cap to make sure that ADUs are the intended use, I guess. But
It is
Michael?
supposed to be accessory.
yeah, it's supposed to be an accessory, not a whole another house.
I agree.
Michael?
I think we should definitely look at some sort of cap. I mean, we just refinished my basement here and add the in-law in the basement, and we're not renting it out. But, when I get older, if for my mom needs someplace to stay, just like an in-law, we have that available. So I would, when we build a garage, I would like the benefit of maybe adding another one up there for a brother, or a sister. But I do think it shouldn't exceed the space, either of the home, like you said, Sandy, or the general space of a dwelling, normal dwelling should be. And what that is, I don't know. Maybe that's something we can discuss, but I do believe some sort of cap should be on there because, I can already see people taking advantage of it and doing 10 different things than what it's supposed to be. So I agree. I think a cap would be good.
Dan?
No bigger than the primary residence seems like it would be an easy place to start.
Agreed.
But what about if we're allowing ADUs on existing structures, as we just decided? What if someone does indeed have a barn that's much larger than their current house? Would they not be allowed to build the ADU on top of the barn?
They'd be able to build one as big as the house.
Well, some houses are really huge too. So, I mean, to me, I think we should, my thought is that it should be a defined cap for the intent of what an accessory dwelling is supposed to be. And again, we're not supposed to be allowing a second home. You know, I don't think that was the intent of this section. There's other parts of LD 2003 that will open up other density. This is just a small piece of it. So I don't know, maybe we need Doug to take a look at some square footages and put it in perspective for us of what a standard ranch square footage is or something like that, so that we have a better way of identifying what that cap should be. I want to let Marty weigh in. I know it's going to be hard since he can't do audio, but Marty, do you want some type of cap or no, some type of cap? Okay, Dan?
Well, my two brothers, my sister, my parents, and I all grew up in this 1,100 square foot house, and I lived to tell about it.
Yeah, my husband had 10 kids in a farmhouse. So yeah, it can be done. Michael?
My question too is with any of these planning, do these still have to go ahead of the planning board to get done, or is these the LD, the new legislation, is this passing that planning board and it's kind of a go to the town, get your permit and do your thing?
The latter. Nope. The intention is, the statute is actually silent on it, but this doesn't rise to, we're talking about adding a residential unit. No, I don't, it's code officer.
Got it. And I was thinking, if depending on situational by situational basis, would that be something the code officer would be able to look at with any sort of cap dependent on the square footage? Because every situation will be different. I'm just kind of thinking outside the box here on how we can take it by, by request and by permit, instead of, putting a one glove fits all sort of situation on that cap. Trying to think outside the box here.
You really can't, with a straight face, empower the CEO to come up with a case-by-case cap. You really it needs to be more formalized.
Got it.
I mean, there could be a sliding scale. I mean, you could say, I don't know how complicated you want to get, but as an example, you could say, okay, if the footprint of the existing principal single-family house is greater than X, then the accessory apartment can be Y, but but the simple, I would concur with the chair that the easiest is to have a cap. And in response to Krista's question, if you did have a big barn, you could utilize a portion. If you had a maximum finished, finished living area, you could finish off part of the barn, but maybe not all of it, if there were a maximum square foot cap.
I was also thinking, like, if we have that cap and we have that standard set, if there's any additional, if they would like to pursue any additional square footage on top of that, then at that point, could we then send that to the ordinance board as a one-off, saying, we'd like to have this bigger, have them handle that, and then come back to us for approval sort of situation? Would that work?
Would be.
Or is that too, way
It
too
would-
much of a mess?
It would be planning board, probably. Ordinances, just, writing ordinances, but.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Yeah, planning board. I'm sorry.
But that, it depends how complicated you want to make it from an administrative perspective. It really, it's, the cleanest would be to have either a couple sizes for the existing single family
Mhm.
with a corresponding cap, or the simplest would be just a cap. So, okay, here's your cap. It's
Yes.
750, it's 1,000, it's whatever it is.
Let's do that. Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out like the one-offs because I always know there's going to be people that are like, "Well, it's way too small for my large in-law apartment," and I'm trying to give those folks leeway. But I think you're right. If we can keep it simple, silly, as my mom used to say, and add that cap, I think we can alleviate more headache than achieving it.
Sandy had to step away, so I'm just gonna fill in here. Dan, go ahead.
Yeah, well, just for yucks, I just kind of asked the internet what a average 2-bedroom apartment size was. And it coughed up 1,100 square feet. So, and that's the size of the house that I grew up in, which was 1,100 square feet. And so I think that would be a very reasonable cap.
Yeah, it sounds like the majority feels we need a cap, and Tammy also weighed in. Thanks, Tammy. She said, I would like to see a square footage cap and a defined number. ADUs should be subordinate in nature. Yeah, so I don't know, Doug, I don't know. Maybe 1,100 is a good number. Is there a way you could do a little research to come up with an average that might be applicable?
We can, yeah, no, we can, and it's, if you have there's still, even if you have, let's say we use the 1,100, if you have a small house, it's possible that the ADU would morph, if you will, the single family, but most situations, I mean, the simpler the better.
Okay, well, we'll proceed with that plan of attack.
Okay.
Looks like Sandy's back, but I think there was still some amendments you were going to go through. You want to continue?
Yes, so I'll keep going. So, okay, let's see, and look, I'm still on the 3/4 of the way down packet, page 29. Number 9. ADUs must have shared common utilities such as water, electricity, except as required by applicable codes. That is the third element that came up at OAC. Some members of the OAC felt like that, and this is not in the statute. This is a carryover from and the last one was the owner occupied nature, which is next. So those were the last two that came up from OAC. Some of the OAC members felt as though requiring that the utilities be shared as well as the owner occupied were not appropriate for the intent. I would submit that my sense, and I'm happy to be wrong about this, my sense is that the owner occupied nature had, in general, I think, has support, because if the owner lives there, either in the apartment or in the accessory unit or the single family, then they, in general, if they live there, they tend to take perhaps better care of their property. That's my perception, but so those are the last two for the section.
Yeah, we can go around. Owner occupied, I'm for that. Especially since we're expanding this. Again, I think it's a way for us to see how this plays out a little bit. And then also the shared utilities. So I guess I mean, they'd have, it's in all likelihood, they may want to like have the electric on a separate meter. So I guess and sewer, I can see that they, if it's a septic tank, obviously it would need to be plugged in. So that would be separate. So these utilities are more like electric and water, or is it also, because I mean, I don't really see a need for them to be on the same utility structure if they don't want it to be, unless there's a reason it's done that way. but owner occupied I'm for.
I think the reason it was on the accessory apartment is to try to have it be, the accessory apartment was supposed to be subordinate to the single family. I think that it was a way to try to instill that.
Yeah, I think if we do a square footage cap, though, we might accomplish that. And then if they want to have, I mean, if they want to share utilities, I don't see a problem with it, but I don't think it should be mandated, I guess. So it could be either or, depending on what that person wants to do. Krista?
Yeah, I agree about the utilities. I mean, some people might treat this kind of how you would treat a duplex. I mean, you have two separate people paying for your utilities. I guess, yeah, the owner occupied, it didn't strike me as odd when I was reading it, so I'm comfortable leaving that in.
Dan?
Yeah, yeah, I definitely am on board with the owner occupied piece, since again, we're talking about accessory dwelling. I don't have strong feelings on utilities, and then I do think that the, 1,100 square feet, it to no bigger than the primary residence is kind of still what I'm in favor of. But if it's septic's an issue, I mean, you're not going to be able to build an accessory dwelling unit if you can't provide septic, and you're either gonna, most people don't build a septic system that's larger than what they need for their house. So anybody who puts up an accessory dwelling unit is either going to have to be able to enlarge their current system or have enough space on the property for yet a separate one altogether. So that in and of itself is somewhat of a limiting factor, because correct me if I'm wrong, Doug, I think your septic systems are still sized based on the number of bedrooms that you have in the structure. So that is definitely a somewhat self-limiting detail too. So yeah, all in favor. Yeah, I think, to be honest with you, some of the issues we've been having with duplexes has just been the cultural change, where once upon a time, almost every duplex was, the owner lived in the duplex and they rented out the rest of the property. But now many more of them are completely rental properties. And I think, that's just created a different can of worms for some people in some neighborhoods.
Thanks, Dan. Michael?
So yes, on a square footage cap, I do agree single family should be in there, but maybe we limit the single family usage to like the first year or 2 years, maybe. Because I know when we first started purchasing or looking for a duplex, that was our plan for income, is I'll live there for about 4 or 5 years, spruce it up. And then we purchased our single family, moved in here, renovated the basement, and now we'll be using that for rental income for retirement. So I agree. I think the single family is good, but maybe put a statute on limitation of time that you have to live there, kind of like you do when you sign the mortgage for that first time home buyer situation. And then I also think not having the utilities, or having utilities be separate, I think is also super important. I don't think it should be mandated under one.
Okay, and you mean owner occupied when you say single family?
Yes. Yes.
Thank you. All right.
Yes.
Marty? Definitely split the utilities if they want to. Okay.
Nice charades, Marty. You're on my team.
I know, he's getting really good at this.
Good.
So I think the owner occupied is yes, Doug. And to Michael's point, let's start off that way, but that's a good idea as we see how this rolls out. If we wanted to put a limit, we should consider maybe a time limit to start. But for now, I think it should be mandated. I think you've got consensus that it should be mandated, owner occupied. Utilities can be together or split.
It just, for future, keep putting a time limit and tracking that would be really problematic. Tracking the owner occupied is quite easy because you can look at the tax bill, and if the tax bill goes to that physical address, you're good. But a time limit, but that sounds like a future discussion. Okay. The rest of back on council packet, page 29. This is just trying to be crystal clear. The new The one at the bottom of the page there, that's right in line with the statute. Even if it's a non-conforming lot of record, it has to be allowed. The ownership, I'm at the top of packet page 30. We just talked about the ownership. Now I'm on C, aesthetics, and the prior language is left over from when the OAC redid, if you will, accessory apartments. And as noted in there, there are some relatively minor changes. But this is the aesthetics, and I believe Counselor McGuire, as well as others, actually had questions, so I'll stop here.
Yep, Dan?
Actually, I just had a question about the non-conforming lot. I assume the non-conforming lot, though, all of the other things that I mentioned before, like septic and setbacks, would still have to apply?
Yep.
On a non-conforming lot, is that correct, Doug?
That is correct.
So eligible, they may actually not be because of other limiting factors.
But they need to meet subsurface, they need to meet setbacks, they need to meet, I think, lot coverage. Something tells me lot coverage is in the statute, that you can't deny it for lot coverage, but in general, they need to meet all the other standards, yes.
Okay, I mean, I don't know if that's clear there or not, but it will eventually come up. Thank you. And the aesthetics piece is fine by me.
Okay.
Any other questions on the aesthetics or design standards? Not seeing any, Doug.
Okay. Let's see. Okay, so bottom of page 30, our wastewater disposal standards. Let's see. Much of this language is left over from when about 6 years ago, 7 years ago, however many years ago, we redid the accessory apartment standards, and this is being clear that you need to meet what they call first-time system. The plumbing code is divided into replacement system criteria and first-time system. This is being clear that the septic system for the wastewater for the ADU needs to meet first-time system. And in the middle of the page, on page 31 there, we added the line based on sufficient information provided to the LPI. So the applicant needs to get a site evaluator to demonstrate that they have sufficient wastewater capacity. The potable, at the 3/4 of the way down, page 31, potable water supply. This is directly from the statute, including the requirement in E1B that it needs to be potable, and I'm on the top of page 32, potable and acceptable for domestic use. That's right out of the statute. Quite interesting. A question came up with the recent state DECD workshop. It talks about water quality, but what about quantity? And the recommendation from state DEDC is that's not in the statute. So unless we want to be adding that, that potable water requirement is again right out of the statute. So, and I think so. That's pretty. And so,
Dan?
oh, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, I think that I would be surprised if any homeowner was willing to build an ADU if they couldn't provide enough water to the thing.
No.
I think the home occupancy piece is another sort of prevents, I guess, those kinds of things from happening. Thanks.
Okay. So let's see, the balance here I'm on, so this is a portion of the subdivision ordinance 401. I am on council packet page 35 in the middle of the page. And there is currently on the books a requirement that only single family, and these are just residential open space subdivisions, not regular subdivision. These are reduced lot sizes with the balance in the fraction, typically a fractionally owned common open space. Because of this new legislation, we need to eliminate the language in here in D2 about only single family. And I'm realizing we probably should specifically disallow duplexes. We'll take care of that. That always comes up. People always want to put duplexes in residential open space subdivisions. Yes, they can have a single family in an ADU, but they are going to be looking, they're going to say, where in here does it say I can't put a duplex in a residential open space subdivision? So we're going to need to add that. Spec out duplexes, two-family dwellings. I'm sorry, not duplexes. Okay. And that is the only change to the subdivision ordinance because of the language that's currently on the books. And then pages 37 through 39 is an excerpt of the state law that focuses on ADUs, just in case anyone has trouble falling asleep tonight. So
Yeah, not likely after this workshop. I think we're good.
okay.
Getting back on packet page 19, just for your three council policy inputs.
Yeah.
And so, and the amendment addendum that Kristen sent, I think speaks to these or provides a little more information. So the first one we kind of already talked about, which is allowing ADUs in existing detached structures. And I think you covered the DECD's feedback on that. So I think we're okay there. But number 2 is specifying the ADUs can be located in new structures built for other primary purposes. And it just says our town attorney and DECD have confirmed that determining quote primary purposes would be up to the interpretation of the code enforcement officer. So that sounds like that one's addressed, or do you need something from us?
I think that Kristen can weigh in, but I think that there's so many different situations, and that
Yeah, that's not us.
and remember that a CEO's determination is appealable as an administrative appeal to the Board of Appeals, just like the code officer is the determination person for zoning uses. Same thing.
Right. Okay. And then the third one, limiting eligible properties to 1 ADU, and it just said the town must allow at least 1 ADU on the property, but may allow more.
Exactly.
So the question for us is, do we want to limit ADUs to 1 ADU for eligible properties? Is that what,
Exactly.
or, yeah, okay.
Exactly.
Thoughts, Krista?
Well, I guess I know Nate kind of addressed it earlier, but what happened to the language that said that we had to allow up to 4 ADUs in a dense, according to the
That's
growth zone?
That's a different part of the legislation. As I said at the beginning, this language is intended to address the ADU portion of 2003. There are increased density requirements, and there's, I think, is it affordable? There are
Okay.
3 different components, if you will.
Okay,
And this is part 1 of 3.
got it. Okay, so we'll address the additional ADUs in the density discussion.
And
Got
they're not always ADUs. The density is separate again, and the rulemaking hasn't even come out for the other two components of the legislation, which is
Oh, okay.
kind of a tricky situation here because it's supposed to become effective, but we don't even have the rulemaking yet.
Yeah.
So I'm not
It's-
quite sure where it's going to land. But
It's really
Boy.
been quite the process.
Horse and
Yeah,
cart, horse and cart.
I think we should stick with one for now, especially since rulemaking has not been complete. Why expand it beyond the requirement at this point?
Okay, thank you, Krista. Dan?
Yeah, I would agree with that for one. If it was more than one, though, in the future, would we be able to would we be able to consider it a subdivision?
The legislation is clear that subdivision is still applicable. So if they were
Okay,
to
so
add-
if it was more than, yeah. So I think we could protect ourselves that way if it comes to that.
unless they did the 5-year wait thing, that's just as a footnote. They could wait, they could add
Right.
one, wait 5 years, add another. You see what I mean?
Yeah, I do. Yep. Okay, thank you.
Michael?
Yep, one, and I vote for one.
What was that?
Michael, do you agree we should limit it to one ADU at this time?
Totally. I totally agree. I think one is sufficient for now, and then let's see how the rest of the legislation kind of rolls out. And then if we have to come back and amend it at some time, let's do that. But I think one's sufficient.
Marty? That's yes, and I'm also a yes. And Dan just said I'd advocate for a cap language to be 1,100 square feet, not to exceed the size of the primary residence. So thanks for putting that in there, Dan, for them to consider for their update. So I think that's what you needed from us. Is that accurate?
I think so. Yes, this has
Okay,
been,
so I think the next steps is you guys will do notification and we'll try to have this first read set for April 4th. And that will allow this to then go to the planning board at their April 13th meeting. And once again, self-storage, we've already had a public hearing. So, but you know, this is another public hearing. And then for ADUs, this will be the first public hearing. So for anyone who checks out this workshop after the fact or is tuned in, you know, those public hearings are set up so that you can provide public feedback on what we're doing. Just as a reminder, the ADU is being changed to comply with state law. So there may be less wiggle room, or likely is less wiggle room on those changes. Any other final comments?
When your term's up, Sandy, there's always room for you on OA7.
Planning board, ZBA, I think we have a list.
Yeah, absolutely. I can think of lots of opportunities for you.
I just want to thank Doug and Kristen for doing all this work because it was like going through a needle in a haystack. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to point out for people who have other things on hold or waiting. I know the water quality one has come up a couple of times. There are reasons that some of this is on hold because there's only, you know, Doug and Kristen. we keep them quite busy. So
Yeah.
patience is a virtue.
Thank you, Krista, for thinking it to say that.
yeah.
Yes. Yes,
And Kristen's been great. I mean, I've tried to, we've worked on it together, but she's really been the pulling together all the details and she's been a big help. She's great. So.
Great. Well, thank you very much. And thanks for joining us on this snowy night. I just went outside and the storm has arrived. So it's piling up now. All right. Just a reminder that our next meeting is Thursday. This Thursday, it's a budget meeting at 4 o'clock. So we'll see everybody then.
Okay.
Night.